So over the course of the last few lectures, we've been looking at the Gilded Age, which is at the very end of the 20th or the 19th century, and we're going to look today at a kind of a backlash to that discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots. And we're going to start off with a populist movement that began in that last decade of the 19th century, and we'll kind of label it the agrarian revolt. Here you see a cartoon from Tom Watson's People's Party paper, February 25th, 1892. And what you see here is supposed to be Northern and Southern Civil War veterans. They're burying their past antagonism and uniting in a populist campaign. And this campaign that they're talking about is a farmers' alliance. And you see right above it, it says in the middle there on the backs of those four gentlemen at the back of the crowd, it says East, North, South, and West. And this is a uniting, not so much against a regional uniting or anything like that. These are farmers, rank and file people who are looking at the policies of the government, looking at how those policies benefit the wealthy and don't benefit them, and they begin to band together. They put aside their earlier differences and they band together to form a coalition. And there are a number of groups that are involved in this, including organizations of black Southern farmers that are actually included in this, standing right next to the Southern white farmers, which is a huge threat and something that especially the Southern leadership is very, very nervous about. So much of this populist movement is brought about because of where the farmers are sitting at this point. Recent technology has increased farm yields. There are more farmers as we expand out into more and more land, and that pushes agricultural prices down. Now, there also is a direct tie between the prices and the dependency on farmers to get their stuff to market. And so things like railroad companies, this revolt is looking at that and going, they're fixing prices, and they are. The railroads are banded together. They fixed prices and often make it too expensive to ship commodities to market. But it usually costs more to ship them than it does to grow them, and so any potential profit goes straight to the railroads and not to the farmers. The same is true with warehousing and grain elevators. Doing the same thing. They're banding together, they're fixing prices, and between the two of them, they're really pricing American farmers out of the market. And this varies a little bit from region to region, depending on the crops that we're talking about. So there's it's grain out in the Midwest, it's cotton in the South. But these farmer alliances, the groups like the Grange, and I grew up in North Dakota, where today still almost all farmers are co-op members, and so they drive to the co-op to get gasoline for their cars, their tractors, because they buy it in bulk. So they buy their seed together, they buy their fertilizer together, they so often buy equipment together and share it between the co-op. They rent it from the co-op then to make the payments. And we have similar co-ops out here in California. Sunmade, for example. There's no company called Sunmade. There is a co-op of farmers, of raisin growers, farmers who get together. They decide how many acres they're going to put into raisin grapes, and they leave it there. And if a farmer starts growing too much and it looks like it could affect the market, they actually will go to their members and reduce so that they keep the price at a high enough to make a profit, yet low enough to keep it affordable. Sunkist, the orange and grapefruit and lemon and lime company, it's not a company. It is a cooperative. It is a bunch of Kings and Tulare and county farmers growing citrus crops, as well as people in other parts of the country growing citrus. They've banded together to market under a single label their crops, and this allows them to put their crops together. That means that when they're doing sizing and grading and things like that, everybody goes in together, and it gets, so you might end up, if you have say you buy a box of oranges, those oranges may come from a single farmer, or they may come from dozens of farmers because they're graded and sized, and so you get the size you're paying for. And so these are additional ways that the farmers are able to get together in exchanges and co-ops, but ultimately they begin to look to the government to make changes. And they actually will form a political party. Now, this again is a third party. Third parties tend to fail. They often will put forth ideas that then will be within an election cycle or two absorbed by the mainstream, the Republicans and the Democrats. But they often are a precursor to these political changes. And so you see basically a huge group of small producers really being kind of viewing themselves as fundamental to freedom and the restoration of democracy. They're looking at expanding economic opportunity, and they look to the government to do that. And they do this through grassroots mobilization. Like I said, the vision is that we don't want a country of mega farmers. At least that was the notion at the time, that someone with 40 acres, someone with 80 acres could actually make a living and contribute to the economy. That really hasn't happened. We today live in a world of corporate farmers, and by the turn into the 20th century, we were on that road. But you see, here's a group of Kansas populists. These are farmers. They're on their way to a political gathering. This is a photograph from the 1890s, and again, you can see that that these are just regular people. These are not highfalutin lawyers and professors. These are farmers. These are the people who work the land, and you begin to see this kind of spread across the entire country, where these farmer organizations begin to have a political impact. In many ways, this populist coalition is interracial to a certain degree. It also involves a lot of women. This is Mary Elizabeth Lease. She's a member of this agrarian revolt, but she's also a woman pushing for women's suffrage. The populists across the board show up significantly in the election of 1892, and they begin to look, political leaders begin to look at trying to form a coalition between the populist farmers and organized labor. This is pushed when there's a collapse in 1893, basically one of our earlier Great Depressions, even called that at the time. And this sets up a conflict between labor and capital that we really hadn't seen much before. As labor begins to be organized, they begin to be a problem for capital. And by capital, I mean the guys who own the factories, the guys who buy the shares in the factories, and the guys who run the factories. And we begin to see throughout this period a really tight link between government and business. And until we get to the 1930s, so another 40, 50 years from the point where we're talking about right now, any time and every time that there is a labor dispute, it is the U.S. military, it is local police, it's county sheriffs, it's state militia or state National Guard that will come in and defend capital, very often killing, maiming, imprisoning, attacking and harming the people on the other side, labor. And I love to show this picture. This is Andrew Carnegie's Ironworks. This is Homestead, Pennsylvania. But it actually reminds me of Cleveland. And the reason that I say that is that this is a string of steel mills. And railroad tracks, of course, railroads to get the raw materials in and the finished goods out. But if you were to go to downtown Cleveland today, Cleveland is at the northern extreme of the Rust Belt, you would go to downtown and you would stand very much on a hill overlooking the railroad track, and this is what you would see across that little ravine from downtown Cleveland. And the reason I want to show that is it so clearly lays out how tightly knit the development of factories and the growth of the city and the entire urban world that we know. These are intrinsically linked. You don't get large populations concentrating into denser and denser urban areas unless there is some, at least the promise of work. And you see here, of course, that here are the factories across right behind where this guy would be sitting, would be where all of the corporate offices are and that type of thing. And then people would be living around this. And this is really the foundation of most of the, especially the East Coast cities here in the United States. There are a number of strikes that, and really I'm only going to talk about, I've got several listed here, but I'm really going to talk about the miners at Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. This is a strike by the Western Federation of Miners. It is, and you have to understand how the workers are living at this point. Companies like Kaiser, which most of us think of today from the healthcare side, but they were Kaiser Steel was a huge steel company. But companies like that would have a mine where they want to extract, whether it's tin or copper or uranium or gold or whatever it is they want to extract. Those extraction activities tend to happen where there are not already cities. And so the mining companies would often build a town, and they would own the town. They would own all the services. They would own all of the businesses. And basically, if you wanted to shop in, say, Coeur d'Alene, you shopped at a store owned by your employer. And so, yeah, the employer gives you a paycheck, and then you turn that paycheck basically right back to the employer. And so this is a very good deal for these companies. And some of the pressure that the companies are able to exert have to do with conditions with living conditions. And so many of the miners feel that working conditions are not safe. They feel that they're being exploited, and we end up with really a complete and total shutdown strike. Now, again, this is out in the boondocks. It's harder to bring in scabs in a company town than it is to bring in scabs in, say, a factory that's already in a city where there is a workforce willing to go right in. And so, rather than bring in people to do the jobs, what the company does is it basically evicts all of its workers. Instead of saying, okay, well, you're on strike, you're going to come back after the strike is resolved, they just basically say, you know what, we're done. And so they present all of the workers with bills for all of the credit that they've amassed at the company store and their rent and everything else, and they are evicted. They're essentially kicked out into the Rocky Mountains. And they build a tent city adjacent to the town that they had formerly lived in to keep the strike going. It's cold in the Rockies, especially up in Idaho. It's far north, and it's cold in the whole 9 yards. And so many people, like I said, this is a tent city, and so many people dug pits under the tents. That makes it big enough so you can stand up inside of it. It also means that you're down on the ground where the temperatures are less severe than they are at ground level or above. And essentially, the strikers are there, and there's very little that the company can do. So they bring in federal troops, and in the middle of the night, they come in with torches and machine guns, and they start lighting fire to the tents. And as people run out, they begin to mow them down with machine guns. Many people die, and it's the way it goes. The strike, of course, is broken. The workers go back to work. They go back to being in debt. They go back to the same conditions. And really, that will be the pattern until the 1930s. The populists in the agrarian revolt do make some inroads with the miners. There seems to be more of a mental connect between people extracting wealth from the ground and people extracting wealth from the ground. I mean, if you're growing stuff, you're extracting wealth from the ground. If you're digging stuff up, you're extracting from the ground. And so there is a certain level of camaraderie or a certain level of understanding between those two groups. And we do see the beginnings of a coalition in the last decade of the 19th century. However, that it doesn't work with urban workers. Urban workers, factory workers, they see themselves separate from the rural life, separate from the extraction from dirt. Miners are still rural. Farmers are rural. Factory workers, by and large, are urban, and they really, as a group, don't see that the populists in the fields and the mines have exactly the same issues and same goals that they in the labor movement in factories in these urban settings have. And so this causes what should have been groups that got together and made progress because their numbers would have been large. It keeps them splintered, and it allows the powers that be to continue pretty much unabated. This is a Coxey's Army March in 1894. This, we were talking about the Pullman strike of 1894. Earlier, there had been a strike, and there had been a lot of damage, a lot of sabotage to engines. And so during the Pullman strike in 1894, and Pullman are only people involved with the just the Pullman cars. These are the car operators, not the engineers, not the conductors. The U.S. military actually put troops at this level on every train during the strike to guarantee the safety of the trains. Most populist campaigns will end up at some point with a hero. And I think that most people today, many people today in the United States, really should study William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was a sometimes politician, sometimes preacher, sometimes lawyer. He tried to unite the Democratic Party with the populists. Some of that works, some of it doesn't. But he is a well-known orator. He's got a big voice in many ways. Not only is he able to fill a room before there were amplifiers, but he was often spoke in hyperbole and larger than life. And he sets out in 1896 on a national tour basically to rally the farmers and the workers. He very much does kind of what Trump did in the last election. He went to those places where people were feeling that they were neglected, where they were left out, where they weren't part of the national dialogue. And he is running for president against William McKinley, who will actually win. Bryan does have support from the Democrats, from the populists, but there are some very clear and distinct differences between the two of them. McKinley has financial support from big business. That goes without saying in this particular case, and McKinley and Bryan doesn't have that. He's doing it, much as Obama had, with smaller donations from lots and lots of people. The other difference is that in the case of William Jennings Bryan's campaign, it's him. This is one of the parallels with Trump. That is the campaign. There's no great strategy. There's nothing else. You just put the populist candidate out in front, let him ramble, let the people think that what he said made sense, and then move on. Whereas in the case of the McKinley campaign, they had a national political machine. This is a period technology is advancing, the telegraph is out there, the railroads are out there, and they're able to coordinate much better on a nationwide basis the election as it unfolds. Now, one of the issues in the 1896 campaign was how to back our currency. Now, we have gone at various and sundry times in our history from being on the gold standard, where for every dollar in Fort Knox, we can have a dollar in existence. We've often added silver as a second commodity with which to value money. When I was young, we still had dollars, and some would say silver certificates. Others were just regular dollars. So the regular dollars were backed by gold. The silver certificates were backed by silver. And so the basically you couldn't have any more money than what you had in precious metals stored someplace. Now this is a problem because especially in the world today, we're not using coins that actually have $20 worth of gold in them to pay a $20 bill. Or check, I mean, not a bill as in a dollar bill, but in a paying. If I owe somebody $20, I'm not giving them a $20 gold coin. And most of the time I'm giving them paper. Not only when most of the time am I giving them paper, I'm not even giving them paper money. I might not even be giving them a check. I'm probably giving them bits and bytes. It's probably an electronic transfer. And between the time that I make that transfer and the recipient gets the money, that's essentially brand new money. It's money that's been created on the fly. And every time we take out a loan, we're creating new money. And so we still have a very small minority in this country who want to go back to the gold standard, but most people have finally come to the realization that money is worth what money is worth. And I'll just give you one real quick little mental mind, what, to try to figure this out. There is a huge irony and a hypocrisy in valuing your money on commodities in the modern world. It made sense when you made coins out of precious metals, and the coin had the value of the metal that was within it. Today, with electronic money and paper money and checks and promissory notes and all those other things, money is just that we agree that it has value. And so, two things. The first being that consider this about valuing money on a commodity. If I have $1 million worth of gold in Fort Knox, I can issue 1 million $1 bills. But understand that the value of that gold will change from day to day, right? The market value of gold fluctuates on an hourly, if not a daily basis, meaning that there is no stability to the value of the dollar, except that everything is going up and down together. But here's the deal. That demonstrates clearly that the gold has no actual value. In fact, if we had the technique to extract it, gold is one of the most common elements on the planet. We have to extract it. It's deeply buried into the ground. But if its value fluctuates hour to hour, minute to minute, day to day, then it has no real value. And the value of $1's worth of gold is based on $1. That is then based on the $1's worth of gold. This is a circle jerk. If I say the gold is worth this much, I've given it an arbitrary value. Now I can arbitrarily print X number of dollars from it. Tomorrow I can change the value of that gold, and I can either change the value of those dollars, or I can say that gold is worth more. I can now create more dollars. So the gold is valued in the currency, which is valued on the commodity, which changes value. Therefore, relying on either the gold or silver standard or any other commodity is, in the modern world, a fallacy. But I regress. So let's go back to the political cartoon that you're seeing on the screen right now. And this is a political cartoon, a Republican cartoon entitled Dubious. It's from the 1896 campaign, and it is really taking a shot at Bryan. Because Bryan has said that he supports not just the gold standard, but the silver standard as well. And of course, his opponent is pushing for gold only. And so this is a poster next, of two people standing there out in front of the Democratic campaign headquarters, and they're looking at all of these posters promoting adding silver to our currency. And it's different countries: Guatemala, all of South America, Japan, Mexico, all of China, India. These guys all use silver for their currency. Obviously, they're not prosperous, and it's because of the silver valuing of the currency. the people that wanted to see silver added to the gold were the farmers. They wanted more money. They wanted more money to be in circulation, which would then hopefully help them out as the people at the top are still getting richer, and the people at the bottom and the people in the working middle class are not. They're getting poorer. And so the notion of adding silver to the commodity market in which to base our dollars is viewed by the populace as a way to get more money into circulation so that there be more money available for lending so that farmers could borrow more money so they could afford to do what they want to, and it would be at rates that they could afford. Whereas the McKinley campaign is coming back and saying, look, if we go by this, if we were on silver, we would be just as backward as these countries. Now, this is a completely and totally ingenuous argument. The reason that these countries in 1896 are poor is because these are countries that have yet to begin to industrialize. There are industrial countries that are using silver in the mix of their valuation of their currency that are doing fine because they've industrialized. This is the old red herring, right? Oh, well, they use silver and they're poor. Therefore, if you use silver, you will be poor. The two have absolutely nothing to do with each other one way or the other. But that's neither here nor there. Normally, when I bring this slide up in class, I'll ask people, why am I showing you this picture? Of course, this is a picture from the Wizard of Oz. And this is the reason I'm stammering and stuttering right now is that this is one of those things where I'm going to tell you a story and I don't know if it's true or not. But a few years ago, at least one guy did his Ph.D. dissertation on The Wizard of Oz as political commentary. Now, I don't know about when you were younger, but when my son was little, and he's about the age of most of my students, we discovered the Oz books, and Baum wrote about 26 different books about the Land of Oz, The Wizard of Oz being the most popular and the best known. The analysis that I'm about to give you from this book falls apart when you look at the other 25 books, about 25 books, in that they're not political allegories. This one may have been, but it was so popular as a children's book that he continued to write children's books. Or this could be just looking back in hindsight and trying to make things fit. But let's go through it just a little bit. So the first thing you see is, of course, Dorothy in the middle. She is from Kansas. This is where the majority of this is one of the areas where the farmers are most intently pushing for Bryan and pushing for these progressive changes. And so Kansas represents that agrarian revolt, that agrarian uniting of the North, South, East, and West. And Dorothy represents that. She's standing she's talking directly in this particular image to the Cowardly Lion. Now, the Cowardly Lion is known from the book and from the movie as being bombastic and loud, but he's really a big scaredy cat. Well, Jennings Bryan initially said we got to add the silver standard, and then halfway through the campaign he backed down from that, and it was seen as kind of a chicken shit thing to do. It was seen as a backtrack, a cowardly thing. He might be a big, loud lion, but he also is a cowardly lion. You call him on it, and he'll probably back down. The Scarecrow, again, we're back out in the fields. We're looking at the farmers. They've got great hearts, but they haven't got a brain in their head, right? They're seen as simple. And they're not that simple. They really do have brains. They really do have hearts. They really do have these things that in the story they're trying to acquire. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have the Tin Man, a mechanical man, a mechanized man, a man from the factories, the factory workers. This is labor. This is organized industrial labor being represented by the Tin Man. So you have the farmers and the farmer alliances, both with Dorothy and with the Scarecrow, but you have the East Coast factories with the Tin Man. You have William Jennings Bryan with the Cowardly Lion. Toto is actually an abbreviation of totaler, and Bryan, of course, was a teetotaler. He was one of the proponents that would lead to prohibition. He's a non-drinker and very, very loud about it. And so, again, another weird little coincidence. And the last two items that are in this analysis, if you look at what the lion in this case and Dorothy and Toto are standing on, and the scarecrow, it looks like he's lying on it, is the yellow brick road. Well, the yellow brick road leads to Metropolis. It leads to the Emerald City. The Emerald City is the center of all economic activity. That is, of course, New York. And they changed it in the movie, but in the original book, so you had gold bricks, right? Gold bullion leading to the Emerald City, leading to Wall Street, leading to the center of American banking. At the same time, you've got Dorothy wearing not ruby and not white. They were silver slippers in the original book. If you read the book today, you will see she wore silver slippers. And then you can even expand beyond what's in this picture, and you can include the Wicked Witch of the West. Wicked Witch of the West was the railroads who were fixing prices on farmers and making it expensive to ship their grain, along with the grain elevators and the warehousing companies that also were fixing prices. And then the Wicked Witch of the East, of course, that's where the bankers are. That's the bankers who charged high interest rates, who made it difficult for the farmers and the miners, anybody at the lower end of the political spectrum or the economic spectrum, to acquire money, to get loans. So you can roll all of this up into a story that talks about the populist movement at the end of the 19th century, with the farmers and the labor movement and the teetotalers and the bombastic Cowardly Lion and gold and silver and bankers and farmers or railroad companies and warehouses. Does it work? It works. Where it falls apart is in the other 20-plus books that Baum wrote. These don't carry over. There is no political allegory in any of the other books that Baum wrote. So it's a great story. Is it accurate? Who knows? Does it make the point? I think so. And so we're looking at the election of 1892. Again, here is Kansas, right in the middle. Kansas, North Dakota, where I grew up. Colorado, Nevada, Idaho being the states that went the strongest for Bryan. And then you can see that other Midwestern states, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, a little less, but still a very significant percentage of the vote, between 30 and almost 50. And then it goes down from there, where basically the industrial the industrial Midwest, the original Midwest, the Ohio, the Rust Belt, and the New England states, pretty much not working. And so this is where that coalition didn't happen. The workers, the labor movement, didn't really join in with the populist movement that was being driven by farmers. This creates a sharp regional divide. McKinley, of course, wins quite handily. We'll show you that in just a minute. And you'll see that map pretty much reflects almost an exact duplicate of the map I just showed you. This also, McKinley had set up a national organization. He had people in every state. He had people working in almost every precinct. This was really one of the first times that we get an entire national machine as part of an election. And a lot of the modern campaign techniques, negative advertising, getting people, helping with turnout. A lot of those things really are kind of established and solidified in this election, and really will set off Republican dominance over American political life until 1929. Well, till 1932, but essentially from this point in 1896 until just after the stock market crash in the beginning of the Depression, the Republicans hold sway. This is a nice big block, 30 plus years of almost 30 years of Republicans having control, setting up trickle-down economics, which at the time they referred to as the horse and sparrow. The idea being that the horse would eat lots and lots of oats. If we gave the horse all the oats in the world, he couldn't possibly digest them all. And so in the horse shit on the road, there will be enough oats left for the sparrows. That is actually how they sold these economic policies we now refer to as trickle down in the 1890s. Feed the horse too much, what's left on the road the sparrows can have. And that kind of sums it up. As often happens with populist movements, other things become more important. Of course, when the economy crashes, it takes, sometimes it pushes some people into politics, other people it moves them away from them. And so populism as a movement really kind of shows up its weaknesses. When it wasn't able to form the coalition that it had hoped to, it kind of fell apart. And here is that map I was talking about. As you can see, the right in the middle of the country, other than North Dakota. North Dakota is one of the few outliers in this where the populists had done very, very well, but they still went to voted for McKinley instead of Bryan. So that's, again, you can kind of see how this regional divide, which is similar to the regional divide of the Civil War, we will keep seeing this political map, variations of it, right up to the last election. And that kind of wraps up this first part of Freedom's Boundaries, 1890 to 1900. We'll be back with the next lecture next time.